Welcome back. This is episode -14 of the Worch Show. As usual, I have nothing prepared for this episode. I did want to talk about the fact that it is Labor Day, and I am in here putting in work, recording a podcast episode. However, I did zero planning for the episode, so I don't know if that really counts. But when I was setting up, I was thinking, wow, here I am. I'm putting in work. This is, I'm going to get rewarded for this. I'm filming on Labor Day, a holiday, when everyone's out partying, everyone's having a good time. I'm in here enjoying myself, doing what I love, but I'm putting in work. But then I checked myself really quick and I realized that's bullshit. And the reason it's bullshit is because you don't get extra points for doing things when you're not required to do them. You just move forward. And in fact, you're average to all the people that make it big. You're doing extra things. You're just now average. You got to do even more things. I had a buddy of mine. I've been talking years, but he would always post himself on Instagram, and he would write down in the description, at the studio, recording music, 4 a.m., putting in work. And he never dropped a single song, never heard a single song he had. And to this day, there's people outside barbecuing right now. And to this day, he never dropped a song or anything, but he would always post at 3 or 4 a.m. like he wanted kudos for being up so late. When in fact the guy probably slept until noon or 2 p.m. the next day. Not hating, I'm just saying you don't get kudos for that. You get kudos for results, right? You get rewarded in the process, but the outcomes matter. So it doesn't matter that I'm filming here on Labor Day. It counts for nothing extra. All that matters is that I keep putting in the work and staying focused. And at some point, I'm going to have a guest on this podcast. How are we doing here? We're not peaking. So I wanted to bring up that, again, it doesn't matter. I repeat, don't think you're special by putting in extra work or working a few extra hours, or think, wow, I'm doing great because I'm working on Labor Day or I'm working on a holiday, when the day before you took the full day off and you dicked around and you watched Netflix and you didn't do anything. That's my point. So I just got done reading a few books, and they're really good. Morgan Housel, The Psychology of Money. I highly recommend that book. That was the last book that I read about 6 weeks ago, and then I've taken kind of a hiatus from reading, and I've actually been diving more into just real estate work right now, as well as the coffee shop. I haven't really felt like reading. I heard a quote on social media the other day. This guy was talking, and it wasn't a quote, it was a podcast, and he was saying how he never reads, how reading is just mental masturbation. Basically, what he's saying is, it's bullshit. You don't need to read. You just need to work and you need to learn. And then reading is kind of like a false sense of doing something or a false sense of accomplishing something. So I kind of took that to heart a little bit. I was like, I'm going to stop reading for about a month and just see how I feel. I get a lot for me out of reading. It helps me speak better. It helps me articulate. I like to read out loud about half the time, and the other half of the time I'm just, reading to myself. But it definitely helps, get the juices flowing, get the ball rolling. It helps me with my creativity, think about ideas, get different perspectives, different point of views. And there's usually one or two things from every single book that I'll read that I can take away from that book. And probably within the last year, out of all the reading that I do, I started highlighting. I absolutely love highlighting. I got that from my wife. She is a huge fan of highlighting and tabbing and putting notes down in her book. So I started doing that, and that's helped tremendously. I've been able to kind of absorb a little more and then go back. And instead of writing a ton of notes, I can just go back to my highlights, see pertinent things, and then from there kind of look up anything I want to. Another thing that I tried a while back, I haven't done it recently, but just for the sake of time, instead of reading a book cover to cover, which let's say it takes you 10 hours to read a book cover to cover, 250 pages, 300 pages book, 10 or 15 hours, depending on your reading speed. Don't do that. Obviously, if you're reading fiction, do it. If you're reading nonfiction, though, just spend a total of 1 hour with the book, and that's it. Make sure you know the title, the author of the book, a little bit about the author, so you can educate. You can sound educated. You could talk about the author and say, what gives this author credibility? Like, why are you reading this book? What have they done? Have they published any papers? Are they professor at any school? What are their credentials, right? So learn about the author, the year the book was written, obviously the title. You could spend 10 minutes doing that, maybe researching the author. You can spend 50 minutes diving into the book and just searching for those one or two main points that the author wants to talk about. Because ultimately, the author needs to fill the pages. So there'll be a lot of wasted stories, a lot of things that really aren't pertinent for you to know. And if you could get those one or two things, the point that the author is trying to get across out of the book via highlights, skimming through, and then really focus on those points, understand what the author is saying, cross-reference other sources and read about that and get those points. Then when you're talking to someone about the book, you could say, yeah, so-and-so Morgan Housel, in 2020 wrote this book, The Psychology of Money. And in this, he talks mostly, he makes a great point about how it's not about how smart you are making money. It's really about habits and behavior types. And then he gives a bunch of details about that. Now, I read that book cover to cover, but you could have just easily skimmed through that, a few chapters, and got some of the examples that I'm talking about and share that information with someone without spending 10 or 15 hours. So if you're doing 1 hour book, now all of a sudden you can run through 10 or 15 books in a matter of a month instead of, 3 or 4 books. So I've done that a couple of times. I'm going to get back to it. However, there are a few books that I do want to dive in and read cover to cover. So I'm definitely going to do that. Like, the shutter speed on this camera is very slow. So I'm sorry if there's a distortion when I'm talking to you guys. I'm curious to see if that distortion is going to show up with my mouth movements, but who knows? So again, this is episode -14. I've got 6 more solo episodes that I'm going to shoot before I do my first interview. And again, the idea of doing these -1 through 20 episodes was to start the process of filming and stop making excuses to start this podcast. Learn how to film a podcast, multiple cameras, setting up the lighting, a location where I'm going to do it. If not a location, how I'm going to set everything up. Learn how to use a third-party software so I can record into a software using my laptop. So there's a lot of things I wanted to learn and get comfortable with. And then just getting in the routine of recording a podcast once per week. So it's been helpful. So this is episode -14 of the Mark Worch Show. And -21, I'll do my first interview. So the idea is to go to businesses and talk with business owners. This is a business and money mindset podcast, but obviously podcasts go in so many different directions. There's a lot of cool stories that get told during podcasts. So I never want to shy away from those just because they're not exactly business related. But looking forward, I already have a few people that are interested in being on the podcast. So I'm excited to get to know them more prior to shooting and then share all this information about them, who they are and what they do and their day-to-day lives and their business. What else? So I'm getting ready to film a couple TikTok and Instagram shorts. Try to do about, and YouTube shorts also. I try to do about 6 shorts per week. So I'm going to be going over what I learned in What It Takes by Stephen Schwartzman. He's the CEO of BlackRock. In case you haven't heard about BlackRock, they are buying all of the real estate in the entire world, as well as involved in various different hedge funds and other alternative investments. I think they're like $500 billion now is what they're valued at. It's a huge company. There is conspiracy that they are secretly owned by the United States government or various other government entities to basically scoop up all the housing secretly without people knowing, kind of like the Walt Disney effect. Those of you who don't know, Walt Disney, when he was buying all the land for Disney World, he didn't want anyone to know at all or suspect that, one single dominant landowner was purchasing all the land, 30, 40, 50, 200 acres, however many acres it takes to build these parks. So he would put together land trusts. He was using separate realtors, separate attorneys, different land trusts, and he was able to hide ownership, i.e., hide who the buyer was in all these transactions over a series of, I would imagine, 3, 4, 5 years as he assembled all of these adjacent parcels to make one massive parcel. What else? We're at 11 minutes and 40 seconds. We're doing pretty good. So I think reading is good. I've been doing a lot of reading lately. Pick something that you're interested in. Pick something that maybe one of your friends is interested in that you disagree with, and just get a different perspective. Learn. See what it's like. If you're a college student, you're probably forced to read a bunch of bullshit that you're not interested in reading. So you're not reading it because you're like, how is this applicable? Maybe one night, just read it. Just read it, dive deep, and see if it's even interesting. Probably won't be, but just see if you can get into it. Just kind of challenge yourself and do that. But I would definitely challenge you to read as much as possible. Try to stay away from the news. It's good to read current events, business type things. I would definitely stay away from politics because most of that is bullshit. There's so many spins, and ultimately, I don't know. I'm not convinced that learning more about watching more news about politics is going to make your life better or the lives of the people around you better. I think it's good to stay informed generally what's going on, but I'm not so sure that we even know what's going on generally. So I would encourage you to read the news, not watch the news, read the news, particularly about businesses, mergers, acquisitions, things like that. There's a little more truth to that. I think that's been my experience. There's more truth to business type news and finance news than reading something about an election or politics. But nonetheless, reading is good. It helps you think. Perhaps if you read politics things, that's something you want to read. Maybe tell yourself you're not reading to find truth. You're interested. You're reading to find what's the story about, and then ask yourself questions like, why are they telling me this? Why do they want me to believe this? At least you'll get you thinking. So that's a win-win either way. It's definitely better than sitting in front of a TV and watching Netflix and rotting your brain. And that's all I have for today. This is the Mark Worch Show. This is episode -14. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next episode. Thanks.